In 1963, Paul Kelly had been an illustrator for a number of years. He was still a young man in his 30s at that point, and one of the first projects he had was to illustrate Ray Bradbury's Martian Chronicle. And he had done some space things for the National Geographic too. So getting involved with us was kind of a natural thing for him to get involved in. And one of the things that Paul was fascinated by was the enormous power generated by the Mercury Atlas launch vehicle. And he'd called me after he'd gotten back to Connecticut to his home, and he said, "Can you get me film from one of the launch pad cameras so that I could really see what this looks like when this thing goes off?" So I was able to find a strip of 35 millimeter film from one of the pad cameras, and he selected an image out of that and then did this as a very large oil painting of that tremendous amount of power that we were able to harness and use to put individuals into space. Now the chap that I had in the Pacific waiting for the splashdown was Mitchell Jameson. I said he was a professor here at the university. He had to arrive at Pearl Harbor like 5 days before launch, get on the aircraft carrier, sail out to the recovery area, and then wait. And all during this time, he had, there was a NASA link to the aircraft carrier giving you a blow-by-blow description of everything going on. And Cooper stayed up for 22 orbits, so there was quite a bit of time to hear what was happening and to get NASA's information. So when the small parachute popped in the sky and you saw this tiny little spacecraft drop into the ocean and then be brought up on board the deck, and Cooper step out of the spacecraft and step onto the deck, wearing this silver spacesuit. And having been in this thing, which the Mercury spacecraft, the seating is not much more than the front seat, driver's seat of a VW. So he had to sit there, cramped like that, unable to move, unable to stretch, unable to do anything. So when he got out of the spacecraft, he was really not very limber in walking around. So he almost looked like a being from another planet. He was a spaceman that had returned to Earth in that Pacific sun, the sunlight glistening on this aluminum-coated suit, and it really struck Mitchell Jameson as a planetary traveler returning to Earth. Now, getting back to Paul Kelly again, he was involved, as I said, on Cooper's flight. And what he wanted to do, in addition to that launch painting that I showed you a moment ago, he wanted to do something to commemorate the program because the program had ended with Cooper's flight. So he asked if he could borrow a spacesuit to do this still life painting. And we had to go through a lot of problems, a lot of trouble to convince the people at the Manned Spacecraft Center to loan this suit out. And Paul had to promise all kinds of things, that he would take care of it, that he'd return it in the same shape that he got it. And he was able to get Gordon Cooper's suit and helmet and gloves, and he set up this still life to do it. And he called it The End of the Beginning, and another title it was used was Knight's Armor, because it did seem to impress us too as one of these things from that period of history when they donned these silver suits and went out and did battle. Now here is a photograph that was made of Norman Rockwell, who contacted me at one point and wanted to get involved in the space program for Look magazine. And in this particular photograph, he's at Houston wanting to do something on the proposed lunar landing. This was a number of years before the landing took place. And the only model of a lunar module that he could find was set up outside the center, and it was made of plywood and painted white, very accurate but full size. So he was able to get some of the people down there that put on the spacesuits and take all his photographs and go back and do the painting. That's why in the painting you'll see it doesn't have the gold foil that kind of came along later. It's just straight-sided and painted white. And the painting, however, was speculative and based on the best information that was available at the time, and as was mentioned a little earlier, quite inspirational to anyone looking at it, except for one person, and that was Chesley Bonestell. I had an opportunity to meet with him in Carmel, California in, I guess it was 1980. He was a little over 90 years old. And he had a few issues to take up with me about the astronomy in the painting. It was something about, he didn't know if he was on the moon or not, but there were 3 suns shining. But otherwise, he liked the painting. It was a very, very nice job. Just quibbled about the, in a major way, about the astronomy involved. Oh, and again, Norman Rockwell wanted to do something on the Gemini program, so I arranged for him to be down at the Cape during what they call a countdown demonstration test, where a couple of weeks before the launch, the astronauts would meet, the press would be there, and they'd come out in their spacesuits, and they'd go through a routine and do just about everything that they would do before the launch, except actually go to the pad and push the button. And so Rockwell arrived down there with his photographer, and they took lots of photographs of John Young and Gus Grissom getting suited up and going through whatever they do before going to the launch pad. And then when he got back to his studio and began to work on the painting, he really didn't have all the information he needed to make a really accurate painting of the spacesuits. So he asked if I could borrow a spacesuit for him. So I called Houston, and they said no. So I told Rockwell, I'm afraid you can't. He got angry with me, so I called Houston again. They got angry with me. Then finally I found somebody at headquarters that would allow the suit to go. You know, they were saying there's a lot of classified stuff inside the suit, and you can't let it out. We'll let it go, but we have to send a technician with it who has to monitor this all the time he's there. So this technician arrived in Massachusetts at Rockwell's studio, set the suit up. Rockwell would paint. He'd fold the suit up, put it in a box, and take it to his motel and sleep with it. Bring it back the next day, hang it again, and Rockwell would do that, and it went on for about 2 weeks. So Rockwell put the technician in the painting. That's the chap on the left, and his name is Joe Schmidt, and he is a suit technician. And if you go to his website, he'll talk about everything that he's done for NASA about suiting up the astronauts through all the programs, but he'll have the biggest section on his visit with Norman Rockwell and how they became fast friends and would visit often after. So there's a lot of that kind of thing that was kind of a pleasure to work with. And this is a painter that went to the Cape and did this watercolor, Don Kingman from San Francisco. And it's interesting how he combined all ways of flight, from the birds on the left to the balloon to the helicopter to the biplane, and then the major piece being this Saturn 1B launch pad with a Saturn 1B ready to go. Now this is a painting, I guess is the third thing on Paul Kelly I've shown you, but he's done an awful lot of work for the program over a number of years. And one of the assignments I asked him to take on was the Apollo 1 launch. And he had been preparing for it. He'd had a number of photographs in his studio at home, and he wanted to do a portrait of the 3 astronauts in their spacesuits. And it was about that time in 1967 when we had the accident on the launch pad and the 3 astronauts were killed. So Paul called me and he said, what should I do? You know, should I finish the painting or not? And the way he worked on the painting was to do a number of drawings, put them on tissue paper, and then mount them and move it around to get the best composition that he could get. So he had all this done. So that's why you see several different layers and overlapping and kind of a reverse approach, a negative approach on it. And so I said, Paul, look, the mission is not finished, so keep the painting unfinished too. So we thought that was a great idea. So he just left it the way it was and sent it to us, and we showed it that way in the National Gallery, and that's the way it's being shown now. A painting by Bob McCall after Apollo 8. What he was showing here was the return from lunar orbit, where they fire the engines on the backside of the moon. And if you remember, they really didn't know if that engine had worked until they came around the corner. And then Houston took a deep breath and relaxed, and everybody got home safely from that Christmas time flight. Now, one of the interesting things about Cape Canaveral, and I imagine